Hi everyone and welcome to London, ladies and gentlemen. It is a very special weekend. Being Irish with a name like Sinead O'Leary, we have to celebrate our Irishness all over the world. St. Patrick's Day in London, and today I'm taking a tour with a very special tour guide who is an absolute expert in Irish history in London. There is an estimated 375,000 Irish-born people living in the UK, and it's nearly 500,000 if you include people born in Northern Ireland, 1.8% of the population. And as much as people like to go on about the rivalry, there's a great commonality between the Irish and the British. I, for one, living here for myself for 12 years. This is St. Patrick's Day weekend in London, and let me introduce you to this very special girl. So giving me all her time today is this wonderful guide, Ellie from Rebel Tours. Hi Ellie, thank you so much for doing this today. And she's going to have a little walk around. We'll head around some of the most famous sites in London. We'll chat about some of the most famous Irish characters that shaped this history. So this is Ellie. She is wonderful. You're going to love her. Ellie, where are you from, or what's your background in Irish history? You're guiding, you're a historian. Tell us all about yourself before we head off.
I'm a big mix. So originally I'm from the south of Spain.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I have an unusual mix in my family of Irish and Italian as well.
Fabulous.
But I've always had a big passion for Irish history. I think with Rebel Tours as well, we do like to focus on that more radical side of history. So Irish history gives me a lot of very juicy sort of radical stuff to focus on.
So where exactly are we headed first? Well, I think we'll start with the Suffragettes. Does that suit you?
We're here in Parliament Square as well. And I like what you were saying, Sinead, before about the commonality.
Yes.
And that our tour is all about celebrating the Irish contribution to London.
Okay.
So when you walk around London, immediately you don't see that many monuments dedicated to Irish people, but it's absolutely everywhere.
It is everywhere.
So
hidden in plain sight, essentially.
Hidden in plain sight, exactly, yeah. So yeah, let's head over to our suffrage monument and we'll talk a little bit about that.
Fabulous. Okay, I was going to wait till that little boy left, but he's intrigued as well. So this is Millicent Fawcett, ladies and gentlemen. She was given the great honour of being the first female statue in Parliament, and it was erected in 2014 to commemorate 100 years since the suffragettes got the right to vote. Am I right? 2018.
2018,
I'm so
when
sorry.
Some women were allowed to vote.
Under 21, wasn't it?
So
no,
over
21.
the age of 30 and still
Sorry.
property owning. So we haven't yet got to our centenary of universal suffrage.
Okay.
Quite yet. But Millicent Garrett Fawcett is one of the founders of the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies. So she'd be considered a suffragist rather than a suffragette.
As in more of a pacifist as opposed to a radical like Emmeline Pankhurst.
Yeah, so Emmeline Pankhurst and the suffragettes more on that militant side of things.
That's what I was looking for.
Usually more on the moderate side as well. And of course we'd have a lot of British suffragists and suffragettes going over to Ireland to obviously spread the news and the activity over there, and vice versa. We'd have plenty of Irish suffragettes and suffragists also coming over to Britain to take part in protests, demonstrations as well. And a lot of them spent quite some time in Holloway prison, which is where most suffragettes that were arrested would be.
Am I right in saying that was the all-female prison, Holloway?
Yeah. In 1918, when some women could get the vote, we also have the very first woman ever to be elected to Westminster. And of course, she's Irish, and that would be Constance Markievicz.
Yeah.
So Constance Markievicz is actually born in London to a very wealthy Anglo-Irish family, the Gore Booths. Her sister Eva Gore Booth is commemorated on this monument as well. And Constance herself would also join the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies along with Millie. So even though they're born to a lot of privilege and a lot of wealth, they would grow up sort of very conscious of different social causes and also the plight of Ireland's poor, the struggle under British class rule as well. So Constance studies in London at the Slade School of Art. Here she'd come into contact with intellectual circles, and it's here that she becomes more radical as well. But it's really when she moves to Dublin that she gets ties with the Irish Republican Brotherhood, the Daughters of Ireland, and where she joins Sinn Féin.
That's right.
So she stands for Sinn Féin as the MP for Dublin St Patrick's in that election of 1918. She's the only woman elected and the very first to Westminster.
It's incredible because people always confuse that with Lady Nancy Astor.
Yes.
Who was the first to take her seat. Exactly.
Good point, because Constance was in Holloway prison at the time, so she wasn't able to take her seat. Even if she weren't in prison, she would have followed the Sinn Féin policy and she wouldn't have taken her seat anyway.
The oath to the king.
Yeah. The National Archives actually have a lot of her correspondence and notes from her election campaign, which she actually had to run out of her cell in Holloway prison. The reason they have so much on her is because she was under very, very heavy surveillance at that time.
Incredible.
So yeah, we have all this really interesting stuff to read through of Constance. And again, in British history, as you say, we often confuse Nancy Astor, and she's not as spoken about, doesn't get as much attention. She continues her political career, you know, constantly being arrested, released, re-arrested, and she continues that for the rest of her life.
And she never gives up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Power the Irish woman, ladies and gents. Well, yeah, there's a few key figures on here. Let's just have a quick look here, you guys.
So
there's some Irish ones you told me, wasn't there?
Yeah. So I think we've got around the back is Eva Gore Booth.
Okay, just bear with me, folks. We're going to have to crouch down here.
Crouching down.
Not to worry, she's not there. Don't worry. But it's a beautiful monument. So you have a couple of the Irish suffragettes on this monument as well, folks. So have a little stop off here.
Oh, found
you found her? Oh, that's okay.
I found Hannah.
There's Hannah. Is that her there? Oh,
yeah.
Yes, there's Hannah.
Yeah.
Right, ladies and gents. Now, you don't usually see me at this part of Downing Street, but this is the back entrance to Downing Street. And just a quick reference over here is right behind here is where those famous gardens are, where those champagne parties were taking place when we were all locked down. I think it's what it's most famous for. But at this part, we're going to talk about one of the most famous political figures and Republican figures in British history. Ellie's going to talk all about Michael Collins.
Yeah, which is not maybe your immediate thought when you think of Downing Street, of course.
Very true.
This is the residence of the Prime Minister, so you can imagine how many things have happened here over the years, including such an important event in Irish history, which is the Treaty of Independence,
of course,
the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921. So here to sign the treaty, we have the British Prime Minister, David Lloyd George. We have the founder of Sinn Féin, Arthur Griffith. And we have Michael Collins, who leads the Irish Republican Army through the Wars of Independence. So this treaty brings an end to the Irish Wars of Independence. It also leads to the creation of the Independent Republic of Ireland. But importantly, it also partitions the country and those counties in the north that remain part of Great Britain. So not everybody was thrilled with what was signed here. Michael Collins, very eerily, when he signs the treaty here, he says to his fiancée, Kitty, I've signed my death warrant.
That's right.
But to backtrack, he is from County Cork and he's the son of a farmer, and he comes to London in 1906 as a 16-year-old, and he comes to follow his sister who's already living here, and he gets a first job at the post office where he works as a clerk as well. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's part of his mythology, I think, because I've heard people say, oh, that's where he learned his organisational skills, working at the post office. Next to Downing Street, we do also have the Treasury. So Michael Collins actually ended up working here on the Board of Trade as well.
Did wow.
Yeah. But it's here in London, really, that he spends his formative years, which is what I think is important, because although he's only here for 9 years, he does die relatively young, so it is quite a chunk of his life. And because he's only 16, you could say that he becomes, you know, the man that we know, essentially,
that we know to this day,
here in London. And you'll know, Sinead, that, you know, the common expression, oh, you don't know you're Irish till you leave Ireland. I think that's very relatable to any immigrant who has that immigrant experience, because you move somewhere and you sort of try to connect to your roots, and sometimes the roots become even stronger, don't they, as you sort of try to keep your identity.
Faraway hills are always green, as they say.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, a sure sign of that is when you go away to places like Boston and New York.
And you sometimes get more in touch with the culture as well. So Michael Collins definitely did that. He enrolled in Irish language classes in London. He was very sporty as well.
He was very physical, wasn't he?
Very physical. So he joined the Gaelic Athletics Association. He played hurling.
Hurling was his thing. I thought
was
that
very
actually,
much his
yeah.
thing.
This is fascinating. I had no idea about this history of Michael Collins.
Yeah, so he's super involved in all the sort of cultural aspects here in London, but this is also where he becomes political. It's in London that he makes ties with the Irish Republican Brotherhood. It's in London that he joins Sinn Féin, and he starts to make a bit of a name for himself in these circles, though he would have been considered obviously quite young at the time, a bit hot-headed maybe, a little bit sort of rash.
I get that impression, yeah.
And he decides to leave then in 1915 in preparation for the Easter Rising.
Got it.
Now, the leaders of the Easter Rising, a lot of them are executed, but Michael Collins is spared. Along Constance Markievicz that we talked about. So she was execution. Constance was spared execution because she's a woman, which actually really annoyed her. So even though she didn't die, she was really annoyed that the fact that she was a woman was why she was spared.
She was raging. She's like, she didn't understand why she couldn't be executed just because she was a female.
For Collins, it's likely because he was just quite young and he wasn't really seen as much of a leader, but it's in prison that he really emerges as one. And all these years later, he's back in London in a very different capacity. So the Irish delegation that came in 1921, they were very fussed over. There was a big media frenzy around them at the time, and Michael is seen as a sort of very dangerous man, dangerous gunman. Maybe there's a bit of romanticizing around that as well. They were invited to all sorts of parties and events and gatherings.
Gangster kind of esque.
Maybe, yeah. Like while they were here in London. And it's amazing, I think, for me to think about him as this 16-year-old boy, even when he's working here next door, not really believing that he'd be here all these years later, taking part in, one of the most important events in Irish
That is a kind of a
history.
bone of contention as well, really, isn't it? Because he was not a political negotiator. He wasn't he wasn't the front runner that would be representative of the party. He was more the training of the army. He would have been the militant section of it. So I think that he was really hung out to dry.
Yeah.
And that's what the general consensus is, I think, that he was hung out to dry, sent over here to get the impossible and return with a deal that nobody would be happy with. And I always felt bad for him over that.
Yeah, only 8 months later is when he's assassinated.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. Well, that's Downing Street, my lovelies. Okay, guys, so as we're passing, and we're en route now to Charing Cross, we can't walk past the famous offices of the Duke of Wellington. And this might come as a big surprise to most of you, but the Duke of Wellington, Ellie,
is from Dublin.
Very good. Yes, he wasn't too pleased about that, though, was he?
No, and I would think that an alarming amount of Brits don't know that.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't think they realise he was born in Dublin.
Because as you were just saying before, this is one of the biggest heroes in British military history.
Yeah.
So during the Napoleonic Wars, these are the headquarters of the British Armed Forces. The Commander-in-Chief, who was Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington at the time, would have had his offices in here. And he's commemorated everywhere.
And number one London, his home,
everywhere.
Everything.
And I would forgive a lot of Brits for that because he himself didn't view himself as Irish.
Mm-hmm.
So he's born to a very wealthy Anglo-Irish family, and he's part of what we would call the Protestant ascendancy, which is a very elite social group in Dublin mostly. So he's born in Merrion Square, and you can't get as fancy as Merrion Square.
Is it fair to say the Guinness family would be part of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Guinness family
exactly,
were as well,
weren't
they?
Yeah. A lot of the big characters that we talk about now when we come to literature are also kind of part of this set as well. I mean, even Constance Markievicz.
To be fair,
the same as well. It doesn't always mean that if you're Anglo-Irish, Protestant, that you're not going to be radical and pro-independence, because a lot of our revolutionaries are sympathisers, or they're part of it themselves.
Very true.
But that is not the case for the Duke of Wellington, who would be very anti-Catholic, very anti-Irish independence as well. And the Duke would not identify himself as Irish, so he would very much see himself as British and different to the other people. There's a very famous quote that he supposedly said. I don't know if you know this one, Sinead, where just because you're born in a stable doesn't make you a horse. Have you ever heard
Oh my
that?
God, I have. Was that him?
No. Most
Oh.
people think
Okay.
most people think that quote is from the Duke of Wellington, and it sounds a bit offensive, sort of talking about horses and stables. And what he's saying is, just because I'm born here doesn't mean that I'm, one of them.
Yeah.
That was actually said by Daniel O'Connell
Stop it.
about the Duke of Wellington, supposedly. So Daniel
Stop
O'Connell is saying, you're not one of us, and we don't want you
And we're
either.
not claiming you, so you're fine. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Exactly. I really think Daniel O'Connell is so underrated.
I do too.
And underestimated.
Not in Ireland, he's not though.
No,
He's revered there, yeah.
I think sometimes though people might still criticise, and they did at the time, the fact that he's maybe not radical enough. I've heard that a few times. Obviously then in Britain, a lot of people have not even heard of Daniel O'Connell, which I think is quite tragic, because again, he's such an important figure. The first Irish Catholic in modern history to be elected to Westminster, because before that Catholics were not allowed to vote and they were not allowed to sit in Westminster either, and he's here for his entire career. So he's part of what we call the Home Rule movement. So we've talked about our sort of later independence movements. The Home Rule movement is one of the earlier ones. In 1801, this is when Ireland loses its parliament. So the parliament is dissolved, and that is when Ireland formally becomes part of the United Kingdom.
That's right.
So it's no longer the Kingdom of Ireland, it's part of the UK. And so the Home Rule movement is campaigning to get the Parliament back. Daniel O'Connell would have been happy under a British monarchy, going back to the Kingdom of Ireland, as long as Ireland could have its own
own self-governing.
So whilst he's not seeking to go independent all the way, the Home Rule movement was very, very influential. It was very important. Daniel O'Connell today is known as the Liberator.
Yeah.
And he was an incredible public speaker. He was very popular. And, whether you agree with everything he did or said or not, I think he gives a lot of confidence back to Irish Catholics.
If only we had politicians like him to this day. Isn't it amazing?
Well, except for that duel that he fights and ends up killing a man. But
okay.
you don't
Well,
want them
that was
doing
commonplace,
that.
I guess. It's commonplace at the time. That's true. That's true. He did murder someone.
But
That's
otherwise, I do think he's quite underrated. An incredibly skilled politician and really famous all over the world. It's not just the Irish question that he's interested in. Abolition is a huge cause for him, abolition of slavery. And he's a vital part of the final Abolition Act going through in 1833. He was admired by rebels and revolutionaries all over the world. Fred Douglass, the African-American abolitionist.
Oh, yes.
So Fred Douglass comes on a really successful tour of Ireland and Britain, and he meets Daniel O'Connell and they share a platform together, and both of them are absolutely thrilled to meet each other and to share that platform as well. So super
Do you know, she's really instilling the Irish pride in me today. I thank you so much for this, Ellie, because it is absolutely incredible to me that I've been doing so much English history here. Obviously you feel when you live here, but I'm really, really going to focus a bit more on this. It's
very
absolutely
glad.
sensational. And thank you for that, for enlightening me again on it. So, fabulous to think that he got his own memorial. Now, we all love a bit of Oscar Wilde. This gentleman has just given him a cigarette, my lovelies. So, this is the monument to Oscar Wilde. And, of course, one of my favourite quotes by his is, the old believe everything, the middle-aged suspect everything, the youth know everything. But his influence on London is Ellie's job. She's going to tell us all about Oscar Wilde in London.
Oscar Wilde is probably the most famous playwright and
satirical.
writer.
He's witty, phenomenal.
Just phenomenal.
Like a modern day hipster, I guess, really, right?
Yeah. And had this very bohemian lifestyle in London. I think enjoyed great fame and celebrity and success. He is born in Dublin, same as the Duke of Wellington, Merrion Square.
Oh,
so,
again? Wow.
Again, quite a wealthy Anglo-Irish family. So he studies at Trinity College And then he comes to London and he's married to a lady called Constance Lloyd. They have 2 children together and they're enjoying life here in London. He's the author of so many famous works as well.
Plays
One of
and
my
novels.
favourites, The Importance of
Being Earnest, yeah.
And The Picture of Dorian Gray, obviously, is my
Stunning, stunning.
a lot of famous quotes as well, as you've said. There's one on the monument itself, which is, "We're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars," which is
Oh, that's lovely. We're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. I believe he used to premiere his movies on the Royal Theatre
Haymarket
Haymarket.
was a big one for his plays, for sure. So he's born in Dublin, he dies in Paris, but he's very much made and unmade here in London as well. So he has an affair with a man called Lord Alfred Douglas, or Boise, as he's known affectionately. And it's the details of this relationship, when they come to light in a very, very public way, this will be the downfall of Oscar Wilde. Now, Boise's dad is the Marquess of Queensberry. If you've ever heard of the old Queensberry boxing rules, they come from this guy. So it's not someone that you really want to mess with. And also Queensberry is ferociously homophobic. Now, he meets Oscar. They all go out for dinner together. They're getting on like a house on fire. Oscar Wilde's very witty, he's very charming, and he wins Queensberry round. But then Queensberry notices little things between his son and Oscar, and he thinks, I'm not sure that these boys are just being friendly here. I think there's something else going on. And when he feels confident that they're in a relationship together, this is when he starts essentially a smear campaign against the couple. So he has them followed, he has them harassed, and then he leaves a card at one of Oscar's clubs. And the card says, "To Oscar Wilde, posing as a sodomite." He's calling him out very publicly. Now for Oscar, this is the last straw. He decides to do something about him. Against the advice of all of his friends, he sues Queensberry for libel. This is a big mistake because he's now got to prove that Queensberry is lying. So the trial starts off well because Oscar's obviously, cracking jokes and sort of winning over the jury, but soon it turns against him. And now he is essentially on trial for being gay, which we'll remember in this country is a crime up until the 1960s. So we'll continue with this story at the next stop, but I wanted to talk about the sculpture itself as well, which was unveiled in 1998. It's the first sculpture of Oscar Wilde to be unveiled outside of Ireland, and it's by a British artist called Maggie Hambling. Do you like it, Sinead?
I actually do. I think it kind of, as much as it's a bit bizarre the way he looks in it, but it's identifiable immediately. You know it's him.
That is true.
You do know it's him. And the cigarette, my buddy here has a great story about it, that somebody stole it one time and the council put it back again. So in fact, yeah, I do, but I suppose a lot of people don't, do they?
I find that a lot of people kind of are warmer to it now, but at the time in 1998, it received very mixed reviews. So some people compared it to a can of worms, a Medusa,
a Medusa,
bad
yeah.
waxwork,
Well, I like Medusas.
Yeah, me too.
I think she's great.
I like for me, in art, the weirder the better.
The weirder the better.
Honest,
that's what I'm feeling. And I feel like Oscar Wilde would absolutely love it.
Yeah, I think so.
It's blatantly him, yet it doesn't look like it. It's a weird one. Yeah.
It's also coffin shaped, which is kind of, maybe for a lot of people is weird.
It's like a sarcophagi, isn't it?
And you can sit on it. You're supposed to sit on it. So
people sit on it all the time.
Yeah, it's called
have a conversation. They say, isn't it?
The name of it is Conversations with Oscar Wilde.
That's right.
So I sit here and I can have my own conversation with him.
No, personally, I do like it. I have to admit, I've always kind of liked it.
I think for me, the thing that I don't like about it maybe is where it is. It's very out of the way. It's kind of it's not the nicest corner of the town.
Do you know, it might have been nicer inside here at the back of St. Martin in the Fields.
Yeah,
kind of
true.
a more...
Whereas if you go to, in Merrion Square in Dublin, there's another monument there. It's really colourful, it's very bright, it's also very Oscar, it's very playful.
Very up.
And obviously it's kind of right in the centre and he gets a lot more attention.
I agree there. It could maybe have been there could have been a bit more colour, but then again...
But at least we've got something.
We have something for him, and it's wonderful he is remembered here like this. Yeah. Okay, so we're standing outside the really elegant Savoy Hotel, which is a big favourite as well with Frank Sinatra, actually, over the years, and Elizabeth Taylor.
Yes, so lots of the rich and famous will have stayed at the Savoy, and Oscar Wilde is no exception. In March, in 1893, for the entire month, they rent out 2 rooms together.
Oh, wow.
So rooms 361 and 362 of the Savoy. They rack up £4,000 a bill in just food. Just food.
Just food in a month.
Just food. Now, their antics in these 2 rooms actually come to light at the trial. So we have the testimony of staff members, chambermaids, but also what we know as rent boys. So young male prostitutes come forward to testify. Now, we do believe that a lot of these boys were actually coerced by Queensberry and his cronies and the police at the time, and told, look, if you don't testify and say these exact things, then we'll get you for a different crime. So we don't know the veracity, to a lot of the testimony. But this all comes out, and this would be the downfall of Oscar Wilde. So he's sentenced then to gross indecency, which means he gets 2 years in prison with hard labour.
Hard labour for a man like Oscar Wilde.
Yeah. So that was pretty much the end of Oscar. He comes out of prison, but he dies not too long after in Paris in 1900, which is where he's buried. I'd say with Oscar Wilde that would you agree, maybe, Sinead, that we lose his Irishness for one, I think, a lot of the time? Again, he's another one of those...
His spirit is broken.
Yeah, his spirit
And I
is
think
broken.
a broken spirit in an Irish person just loses everything in them, really.
But I think also he is one of those characters that you won't believe the amount of people that when I talk about Oscar Wilde, they don't actually know that he's Irish. That I've actually come across that quite a lot. Yeah.
Oh,
which is interesting.
Okay, guys, so we're standing now in front of the Lyceum Theatre. As you can see, it's Saturday afternoon, matinee day.
Very busy.
So they're all heading in there to see The Lion King. But this was... Right, over to you, Ellie. Sorry.
So we come to another Dubliner now who also went to Trinity College with Oscar Wilde.
That's right.
And this would be the creator of one of the most terrifying creatures in literary history. Of course, I'm talking about Dracula. I'm a big, big horror fan. And so
Amen.
Bram Stoker is
Amen.
definitely one of the giants, I think, for the horror genre, for creating this character and also this incredible mythology and legacy. I mean, we still have all these films that come out, series still.
Even to this day.
To this day, we love Dracula.
Christopher Lee, Gary Oldman. I mean, it's
even
never...
most recently, the recent remake of
Oh
Nosferatu
my God,
as
of course,
well.
Nosferatu. I haven't seen it yet. I'm looking forward to it.
Beautiful, beautifully filmed.
Beautiful.
What does that have to do with the Lion King or the Lyceum Theatre? The Lyceum Theatre opened in the 18th century, but in the late 19th century, it was bought by an actor called Henry Irving, who was really good friends with Bram Stoker, and he convinced Bram to take over the management of the Lyceum. So Bram has moved to London now with his wife Florence, and he does everything at this theatre. So he'll do the scheduling, he'll sort out the tours, the ticketing. He even joins in with the stage crew to help, with the special effects, whatever needs doing on the night. So he's very hands-on, and he's also into the schmoozing. So he's got to get all the important people coming in to watch plays at the Lyceum Theatre. So friends of his like Arthur Conan Doyle, we'd have William Gladstone, and he's even going to get people who are visiting from abroad. So Mark Twain,
Wow.
He gets Buffalo Bill.
Wow.
And I love that because I just love the image of Bram Stoker and Buffalo Bill
in the same theatre.
in the same theatre, like
crazy.
having a drink together is pretty cool as
That's
well.
very special.
And with Dracula, we're told that Dracula is based on a real historical character called Vlad the Impaler, and it's set in Transylvania, in Romania. Vlad the Impaler is supposedly the son of a ruler called Vlad Dracul, so Dracula meaning son of Dracul, which means dragon. The thing is, Bram Stoker has never been to Transylvania, to Romania. He doesn't really know anything about the country, nothing really about the traditions, the culture. And the other thing is that Bram Stoker never ever makes any mention of Vlad the Impaler. He never connects his Dracula to any historical character whatsoever. The working title for Dracula was Count Vampire. It's not as catchy though, is it?
No, God, no, not that one.
He never intends to set the scene in Transylvania, so these are things that come later. So I imagine he's come across a really cool name, Dracula, and thought, yeah, that's a little bit better, it's a bit catchier, and then he sort of made it work with, you know, Romanian folklore. What he would have known quite a lot about though is Irish folklore in connection to vampires.
Amazing.
And a story that he would have known very well is the story of Avatach. So Avatach comes from County Derry.
Yes.
It's a legend that dates back to the 5th or 6th century. So Avatach, which means dwarf, was a really sort of tyrannical, despotic Irish chieftain. And the people of Derry are a little bit sick of him. So they decide to get together, they capture him, and they kill him. The problem is that they do that quite a lot because every time they murder him, he keeps coming back to life. And every time he comes back to life, he's quite thirsty. Not for water, but for blood.
For Guinness.
Yeah. So they're really at a loss. They don't know what to do. So they approach another chieftain called Cahoon and they say, look, can you help us out? How can we defeat this guy? And Cahoon says, well, I don't really know, but I'm going to ask a druid. And the druid says, don't worry, I've seen this before. This is one of the undead. So what you've got to do is next time you murder him, bury him upside down and drive a wooden stake right through his heart. And then cover the grave with thorn bushes, with big stones, and that'll solve your problem. They follow the instructions, they do it, and Avatach is no more. So that is the real legend of an Irish vampire that Bram Stoker would have known because it was a popular story in Irish intellectual circles at the time. Yeah. We can also see Irish themes in other parts of Dracula. If we look, there's a lot of Catholic imagery. A lot of people see Dracula as that symbol of oppression himself.
Okay.
There's an interesting connection also for me with cholera outbreaks. Bram Stoker's mum is from Sligo, and in 1832 there was a massive outbreak of cholera in Sligo where people would have literally been buried alive to stop the spread of the disease.
This is amazing. I knew none of this. Go ahead.
Just imagine that it's like a zombie apocalypse sort of scenes. And Bram Stoker's mum witnessed this in person and she managed to escape. So she would have told Bram these sorts of stories when he's growing up as well. And you can't help but see a connection because in the 1840s and 50s, there are big outbreaks of cholera in London.
In Soho, yeah.
In Soho. And a lot of the newly arrived Irish immigrants are blamed for the cholera outbreaks. There'd be a lot of xenophobia at the time around that as well. So you can't help but see
the similarities and where the inspirations came from. So we're in the Seven Dials area of Covent Garden next to you guys, and look at this gorgeous pub. It's one I've never actually been in. You'll be surprised to hear, you guys. But we're going to talk a little bit more about the Irish immigration side of things to London, particularly here in the Seven Dials area.
In the Seven Dials. And the Seven Dials is quite a unique neighbourhood. And it was built in 1690. The idea was quite similar to Covent Garden. So it was supposedly a very fashionable, kind of trendy neighbourhood that was to, you know, attract wealthy tenants. But like Covent Garden, that didn't last for too long. So by the 18th century, there was a lot of slum living in this area, very dilapidated housing, lots of overcrowding as well. It's
which brought disease and cholera and outbreaks.
It's also the epicenter for the gin craze.
Oh, well, yes, the gin craze.
Maybe a story for another time, but it's a very fascinating period. And by the 19th century, it was very established as an Irish neighbourhood. Now, Irish working class families had been coming to this area as far back as Elizabethan times. So when immigration increases, it only makes sense that newly arrived immigrants are going to go to already Irish enclaves.
Established areas, yeah.
Exactly, and this was fast becoming one of them. So by the 1840s, 1 million people had left Ireland.
Yeah.
And there was another million in the 10 years that followed. So as we've mentioned, the Great Hunger is one of the big causes of this. Between 1 and 3 million people die, and those that manage to escape and, you know, try to start again mostly are on their way to the United States. But we have quite a lot of people that end up here as well. And
it's important to know that, because a lot of people don't realise this, but they believe that the famine was as a result of the failure of the potato crop. Now, that was a stable diet of people at the time because it was the cheapest source of sustenance. However, there was food in the country.
Absolutely.
The food was in the country because the potato crop also failed in Britain.
Yeah,
so
it failed all over Europe.
All over
Europe.
Europe.
A fungus, of course.
It was a fungus,
yeah.
that's right. So,
which is why we usually say the Great Hunger rather than the famine.
Than the famine.
A famine implies that there is no food. It's only the potato that's affected. Which
exactly.
Of course,
so yeah, there was food in Ireland.
There's food, but all this food that's being produced in Ireland, of course, is coming here to England
exported.
To then be exported, as part of the British Empire all over the world. So this food would be protected at gunpoint by the Brits to ensure that people didn't
So they
get
were
it.
starved,
They were
basically.
starved, yeah.
And it was a tactic of war.
Yeah, which is why you'll hear Irish historians in particular refer to it usually as the Great
Hunger as opposed to the famine.
The famine.
I agree.
Yeah. Shall we go and have a look at the site of the workhouse?
Fantastic. Sounds good. So this is the site of an actual workhouse, ladies and gents, right here, and a bit similar, I guess, to Providence Road that we saw in the Whitechapel and Jack the Ripper video. It was used to shelter people in extreme poverty, essentially. But workhouses were just cruel. They were, Go ahead, darling. Sorry.
Yeah, this is the St Giles Parish Workhouse, which is the name of the parish that we're in. The poverty laws that come in England in the 1830s sort of established this institution of the workhouse. So I'd say the big difference is with, if you've seen your video on Providence Row, is that Providence Row is a charity, and this is the government's idea of how to deal with extreme poverty. So whilst charities would be there, like Providence Row, to actually help people, give people a bit of a leg up, the workhouse was under the guise of poverty relief, but as you've said, they were pretty cruel places. They were quite atrocious in their treatment of people. The physical conditions of the workhouse were unbelievably tough, the psychological conditions as well.
Well, that's the interesting part, because we talk about this in Jack the Ripper as well, that like the rooms, were 6-inch horsehair mattresses infested with all types of urine, scabies, lice and feces. Vermin, mice and running around the place, rat bites, you were required in some of these places, I believe, to take a bath.
Yeah, in dirty water.
The same bath
that
water
hundreds
changed
of
once a
people
month.
had been in.
Exactly.
All of this was to wear you down. Also, the idea that you should be ashamed that you've had to come and claim this poverty relief.
Yeah.
Also, if you came with a family, if you had children with you, for instance, in a charity like Providence Row in Whitechapel, children would be allowed to stay with you. They would go to school while you went to work. In the workhouse, if your children were over the age of 7, you would be separated, and you wouldn't really have the assurance that you'd be able to see your children again. So for a lot of people, it was a very much a last resort, which is why it served as a deterrent. That was the idea. That if the poverty relief is so horrendous, this was not a place where you could come and get back on your feet, really.
And that's a very good point, because there was no rehabilitation, there was no help or how to function in society or how to find work or anything like that.
No, exactly.
An impossible
Whereas
situation.
A charity might be helping you to find paid employment. Some Victorian charities offered workshops and classes to help you upskill, and the workhouse did nothing of the sort. They would make you work. That's why it's called the workhouse. You were required to do manual labor. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't be paid any money for this, so you just got into these cycles of poverty. People could stay months at a time at the workhouse, and then they'd end up back in maybe a few months later, and on and on and on. Most working class people would end up in the workhouse at least once or twice during their lifetime, which would be really traumatic. So a lot of people in this neighbourhood, therefore a lot of Irish families, men, women and children, would have spent time inside St Giles Parish Workhouse. And that all sounds really sad and depressing, and life was really tough in this area. It was very overcrowded. St Giles had a really high mortality rate in the 19th century. When we think of like slum living, we always think of Whitechapel and the East End, but St Giles was one of the poorest neighbourhoods in London in the 19th century.
It's interesting,
and it is very much an Irish neighbourhood by that point, so people called this area Little Dublin, and it was also known as the Holy Land because most people here were Catholic. Even so, even though life is tough, there is a great sense of community here as well.
This is the thing. It's the same as the East End.
Yeah.
It's like a Tale of Two Cities. As
Yeah.
Charles Dickens said, it may have been the worst of times, it could also be the best of times. They made the best of what they had.
So people would be segregated by, nationality, socially, and even by religion, but they would find that sense of community. So
Communality,
people would put together, to cover people's funeral expenses or help with childcare for the newly arrived immigrants. They'd help you find a job or find accommodation and this sort of thing. It was also quite a self-contained neighbourhood, so you had everything that
everyone was family.
Here. Everyone was family.
Still
everyone
the same in Ireland
knew
to
each
this
other.
day. Exactly, even to this day.
And yeah, you get still a little bit of that in some neighbourhoods of the East End. But you'd have shops here, street vendors, there'd be bathhouses, the local post office. So everything you needed was here, including 43 pubs in the 19th century.
And it's not even always about the alcohol. Like I always say this to people. It's the same with London. There's so many pubs here, and it's not about drinking. Pubs offer so much more than alcohol for people.
Pubs are the social hub.
They're the social hub
of
society in Ireland and England.
And here, so people often, visitors from abroad often comment on how many pubs there are, and we're losing a lot of pubs. There were so many more pubs in the Victorian era. So we've said this is quite a poor area. Irish professionals, they wouldn't be too far from here either. They tended to sort of gravitate towards Bloomsbury.
Okay.
Which is a little bit further north here, but very close.
Near Fitzrovia area. We did a little tour in that as well, yeah.
So that's more middle classy. A lot of the English professionals would be there as well. So if you had a bit more money, you'd kind of go more to the middle class areas, and working class families would be.
It's ironic, isn't it, though? The Irish always fought and they worked their way out of situations. They broke their backs to make a better lives for their families, and even to this day, the success of Irish people all over London. I mean, they've left their mark all over the world.
Yeah, as
they've built
seen.
New York City, It's the same in the USA and Canada and Australia, all over the world. Yeah. And that is why St. Patrick's Day, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the biggest celebrated festivals in the world.
It's so global.
And what amazes me is how people embrace it so much in countries all over the world, because we are everywhere, essentially. But even the biggest monuments like Buckingham Palace, the London Eye, who would have thought back in the day Buckingham Palace would be lit up green to celebrate the Irish?
Yeah.
The same with the London Eye, but you see the Eiffel Tower in Rome, they do it. They even do it in Africa. The rivers dyed green in Chicago. So that was an absolutely beautiful tour, and I am so grateful to you, Ellie. I am so actually embarrassed. I should know so much more about my history of Irish in London, and you've instilled this kind of a sense of pride in me and this need to learn more.
And
I absolutely will. I'm going to do an awful lot more research on this. This is our St. Patrick's Day edition, ladies and gents. I do intend on going at the parade tomorrow, but in the meantime, give this girl a big round of applause, my darlings. Thank you most sincerely, Ellie. You've been an absolute pleasure, and happy St. Patrick's Day. Ellie runs Rebel Tours in London. Rebel Tours, what's the email? I'll put it all underneath. Anyway.
Yeah, so you can find us at rebeltours.co.uk or Rebel Tours London on social media.
On social media, and there's so many other amazing tours they run. So make sure to check them out, you guys. I'll put a link into their website underneath. Thanks as ever for watching. Happy St. Patrick's Day, you guys. We're not done yet, though. Okay, so I managed to make it up to the beginning of the parade. I'm down here on Regent Street, St. James, so we'll just get a few highlights. Keely Harrington, the Olympic gold medalist, is one of the Grand Marshals. There's a Paralympic gold medalist as well, one of the Grand Marshals today. So let's get a few highlights of the London St. Patrick's Day parade. And there are this year's Grand Marshals, the Olympic gold medalists. There's Keely and the Paralympian as well. Amazing. Keely who won it there. I guess there's some of the more dignitaries in the Irish community. I'm not aware of any of them, but anyway. that is a little bit of the celebrations. Paddy's Day in London, ladies and gents. And for right now, Tanapti Lola Fela Fordrick, a Chorda. Basically, let's have a wonderful Paddy's Day. My friends, my lovelies, a Chorda, I'll call you Askelga. Sinead signing out here, St. Patrick's Day 2025. Hope you enjoyed this. And a big thank you to Rebel Tours and Ellie for our amazing tour yesterday. Thanks for joining me, you guys. I appreciate it.